My name's Rick Zamperin. We are here to inform you. Well, Ken is, not necessarily me, but Ken's going to tell you all you need to know to build a secondary dwelling in your home and make it a win-win situation for many in the community. Many have already experienced that win-win situation by getting more out of their home. You can book a free consultation today with Ken and his team. Head online to LegalSecondSuites.com. Ken, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Rick. It's great to be back in studio with you and to talk about this important topic of housing, creating housing, much needed housing, many forms of housing. And obviously, I'm here to, really talk about and educate people on secondary dwelling units and additional dwelling units and coach houses and laneway houses and many other wonderful ways of adding units.
We got lots of things on the docket today. We're going to talk about how you and your team can help people out there who are listening who are thinking, geez, we got that basement, we have that extra space, it needs a little bit of TLC or some reno. How can we get the most out of that space? We'll also talk about the tiny home show that happened last weekend at the Ancaster Fairgrounds. But to begin, we're going to talk about increasing demand for secondary units as home buyers grapple with rate hikes. So interest rates continue to go up. Mortgage rates, by extension, have gone up. What kind of wrinkle is that thrown into the game?
Yeah, so it's an interesting dynamic to watch what's happening out there. As interest rates continue to tick upwards. Despite all the experts saying that they probably shouldn't. Bank of Canada is still increasing rates, still talking about increasing rates, and so what we're seeing is definitely an increasing demand and interest in people adding units in their home. Why? Because they're struggling with affordability. They're struggling to make those monthly mortgage payments. Even a regular everyday homeowner who wouldn't otherwise consider putting a unit in their home because they don't need the extra income, they're now considering it. So that shows us that we are deep in a crisis right now, where we have everyday people who now need to be adding units in their homes just to afford to live.
Yeah, the scenario that we're seeing time and time again is someone who's been in their home for X amount of years, their mortgage is up for renewal, and all of a sudden they're seeing their mortgage cost, and it has doubled in some cases, and they're thinking, well, I don't want to lose my home. One thing I can do is build a basement apartment, make something in my home that can generate some revenue. Yeah,
and, we talked about this on last month's show about just kind of basic assets versus liabilities, right? For many people, their primary home is a liability. It costs them money every single month to have that home, right? And what we're talking about, what we're advocating for is turning that liability into an asset, into an income-producing asset,
right,
by adding a legal dwelling unit in that home that provides you monthly income to really help with your everyday living.
This is really a win-win too, because from an asset management standpoint, it's a big victory for the homeowner. But also, we know that there's a rental crisis in this community. There's an affordable housing crisis in this community, and this is another way to alleviate that part of the equation.
Yeah, it is. It's multifaceted, this problem, right? Yes, interest rates is one thing. Cost of construction is another big problem. 90, I don't know the exact stat, but let's say 98% of construction out there is financed,
right?
Okay, whether it's through home lines of credit, whether it's through construction loans. And, as interest rates rise, the cost of construction increases, right? The cost of financing these construction projects increase. So, we see it in our office, every time there's a rate hike, there's less leads coming in for new projects, right? And so we have a double-edged sword here, we need more housing units, but it's getting so expensive now to not only just own a home, but then to renovate it and create that income-producing asset.
It's a great point. For first-time homebuyers, this is interesting. A lot of them are more interested in homes that already have that secondary income-producing suite already built and ready to go. They want to move in and Bob's your uncle. Is that because they can't afford to do those renovations or add that extra livable space, or they just can't be bothered?
Well, so it depends on each individual's kind of personal financial situation, right? Like for some people, they don't have the extra cash or capital to, pay the down payment, but then also put a large sum of money out towards renovations
Right.
to create that legal unit in their home. So for these folks, they really want to buy a property that already has that legal unit in it, because it's easier to wrap that into the mortgage up front with the purchase rather than on the back end doing the renovations after the fact. So what we're seeing with a lot of first-time home buyers especially is that when they're out there shopping for a home, they do ideally like the one that already has that legal unit in it, because it makes basically they can generate that income from day one as soon as they move in,
Right.
Rather than having to wait 6, 8, 10 months to create that unit.
Does that home then become more valuable on the market because it already has that income producing suite or whatever it is already built in?
Yeah, look, we all desire more legal income to our names, right? From a mortgage qualifying perspective, right? Anybody who's tried to qualify for a mortgage or a home line of credit, that the more income you have in your personal name, the easier it is to get that financing, right? So obviously, if there's income coming in from that unit, it can be added to your monthly income, which helps you qualify for more of a mortgage, right? So when people can qualify for more, for the same housing type, there's gonna be a lot of increased demand, right, for that housing type, right? So again, it goes back to supply and demand functions here, where something that's in more demand and we have very little supply, it pushes prices up, right? So it does, in that sense, it does make the home more valuable.
Right. Yeah. There's more competition. The price is only going to go up because not everyone, but many people want to have that extra income generated from their home. I want to ask you about this. When it comes to adding a legal second suite, what are some of the most common questions you get? Because I'm guaranteeing that if I'm a homeowner and I'm thinking, let's get more out of my home, I'm going to put an additional, legal second suite, I got a litany of questions. What are some of the more common ones that people have?
Yeah, obviously, the number one question is, can I do it here at my property? Right. And so for us, it's
this is a zoning issue.
This is a zoning issue, right? Which is our number one thing. The first thing that we check is we check into the zoning bylaw. We make sure that it's a permitted use of that property, that an additional dwelling unit, secondary dwelling unit, an accessory apartment, whatever that particular municipality calls that unit, we're looking to make sure that it's permitted in that zone, right? That's number one. And then after that, it's really the feasibility of it. Like, how much is it going to cost? What is the cost of implementing this unit, and how long will it take, right? So that's really a discussion based off of the space itself. Like, what are we dealing with? Is it an unfinished basement? Is it a fully finished basement that's been previously renovated? Is it a garage, an empty garage? Or is it going to be a brand new structure we're going to construct in our backyard?
Right.
And so that's a conversation we have with the property owner, and we basically help form that scope of work, which then would ultimately lead to a construction budget. And then there's building code. Obviously, building code.
Right.
We got to meet building code, right?
There's only a few dozen.
I can't brush that aside. Building code is very important, right? Yeah. And again, when we're looking at spaces, especially interior spaces, it really is the number two thing we look at after zoning is our ceiling heights, especially the basement ceiling height. So here in Hamilton, Hamilton's following national building code for minimum ceiling heights in houses for secondary units. And that is 77 inches for your main basement height and 73 inches, 6'1", underneath a bulkhead in your basement. That's Hamilton, okay? Because they're following national code. If you're outside of Hamilton, you're in the other surrounding municipalities, more than likely they're just sticking with the Ontario building code, which for the basement height is 80 inches, 6'8", okay, for the main ceiling height, and 77 inches underneath that bulkhead, 6'5". So very important heights that people need to get ingrained in their head if they're looking at doing an apartment.
Why is there not just one standard height for a basement? Let's just say, why is there a difference between federal and provincial?
Well, so there's a national code, right, that covers all of Canada. The Ontario code is derived from the national code, right? So as a province here, our Ministry of Housing has, come up with variations on the national code that apply to, our province here, right? We have a different climate here in Ontario than we do, let's say, in British Columbia,
okay.
right? or up north, right? So we have to have different codes that kind of reflect our location within Canada. And then, the municipalities, the individual building departments, like the chief building official, also has the authority to, have different interpretations or policy decisions about the code, the building code, right? Wow. So this is where we see in Hamilton that, the chief building official here in Hamilton, this building department, in conversation with the fire department, have accepted following national code for ceiling heights, in particular, and they've agreed that they're going to accept a lower ceiling height, and they deem that it's still going to be a safe unit. And again, that's in combination with the fire department as well, right? Which is great because it allows us, especially here in Hamilton, especially the downtown, the older part of the city, we do have lower ceiling heights, right? So it allows people to implement these units and more basements, if you will, and not have to necessarily dig down the basement. So it's great in that sense. I wish more municipalities would follow a national code for that, but other building divisions in other municipalities, sometimes, for instance, when it comes to existing ceiling assemblies and existing drywalled ceiling in a basement, some municipalities will accept the existing half-inch drywall as meeting like a 15-minute fire separation, whereas other building divisions don't accept that. So that's based off of the authority of the individual chief building official and what they feel and deemed to be safe for their community.
I want to circle back to zoning. And actually, before we get to this conversation, just want to remind our listeners that you're listening to the Building Hamilton Show with Ken Bekendam, brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com on 900 CHML. And to get more out of your home, book a free consultation today with Ken and his team. Head online to LegalSecondSuites.com. So let's just say someone lives on a street and they see that a home down the street, they have several different tenants in this home, and they're thinking, okay, from a zoning perspective, I think we're okay. Is that necessarily the case, or should they still double check?
Well, so, just because your home is located within a zone that permits a particular use doesn't mean that that particular home actually has been legally recognized with that use.
Interesting.
Right? So a lot of people say, oh, my zoning permits, duplexes, triplexes. And they just automatically assume that their home is a legal triplex, let's say. That's not the case. Like, you still have to go through a building permit process for that individual property to make sure that that property is in compliance with the zoning bylaw.
Interesting. So you can have a duplex or a triplex beside that home, but the other home may not qualify or may not be in the same zone.
Yeah. There's, every property is a little bit different,
Apparently.
Every property can be a little bit different in size. The building location within that property can be different setbacks. The built form, so the actual building itself can have a different type of construction to it, and that's what's beautiful about our neighborhoods, is that we have this diversity. But yeah, you can have one house that is a legal duplex, has a secondary dwelling unit in it. It's been through the zoning and building code process to make sure it's fully legalized. You have the one right next door that is completely illegal. And doesn't meet any of the minimum requirements under the code. So it's really important for people to understand that, that, just because something is presented as a triplex, here in Hamilton, there's a lot of illegal triplexes, illegal fourplexes. Just because something is presented to you, whether it's the landlord who's presenting the property to you, or if it's a real estate listing, a realtor who's listing that property for sale as a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, doesn't mean it's actually legal. And this is where the only way to know is to do a zoning compliance check with the city, with the municipality.
Interesting.
And here in Hamilton, we call that a zoning verification report. And it's you can go to the Hamilton's website, city's website, and you can fill out a form and request the zoning of any property. Actually, you don't even have to be the owner of that property.
Oh, wow, really?
So if I want to do a zoning check on this property here where the radio station is, I can do that. I can pay a small fee, and I can have the city confirm the permitted uses of this particular location.
Interesting. Yeah. When it comes to the illegal second suites that I'm sure you've run into a bunch of them, are there many in Hamilton? Is it greater than 50%? I
would still say yes,
okay.
Because, illegal illegal units have been going on in the city for decades and decades and decades. Okay, even going back like 50, 60, 70 years. So we have thousands and thousands of illegal dwelling units in this city, right? And it's not until recently, in the last number of years, that with the changes that the province has come out with and the individual municipalities with updating the zoning bylaws, it's become a lot easier to legalize these units. So, we have 2 to 3 years here of where we've been allowed to do them legally, compared to 50 years of not being able to do it, right? So we have a backlog of illegal units that have to be legalized, right? The city does their part to try and find these units and issue order to complies to property owners and whatnot. It's still primarily a complaint-based process, right? So, the way that city finds out is a neighbor will call and complain, and then bylaw will go out and inspect.
We'll talk about the crisis in our building departments, not only here in Hamilton, but across Ontario as well. But let's get to last weekend's Tiny Home Show at the Ancaster Fairgrounds. A good time was had by all.
You know what? It's this is one part of the industry that I just love. The tiny home, the whole tiny home movement. There were some really, really cool tiny homes that were on display last weekend. People are being so creative with how they're building these units.
Right.
As the industry evolves, we're seeing more well-built, quality-built tiny homes that are meeting the Ontario Building Code. So they're built just like any other home out there, but they're just on a smaller footprint. It's a great way for people, who can't get into traditional home ownership and buying, a big 2,500 square foot or 3,000 square foot single-family home.
Sure.
For them to buy a tiny home that's maybe 400 square feet or 450 square feet, it's a very viable option.
What has been the biggest transformation when it comes to tiny homes over the last, 10 years?
I would say just the quality of the builds are getting better, right? Because we're seeing more people enter the space, and there's more even competition between different tiny home builders. And when we see more competition in the space, people are upping their game, right? And because there's more interest and demand for tiny homes, we're seeing the build quality increase tremendously, right? People are getting much more creative. We're seeing a lot better products being implemented into these units, nicer finishes. Some of them are very, very like luxury. They're like a high-end condo, really cool spaces, very energy efficient too. Like a lot of these builders are building way above minimum building code. They're like energy efficient and LEED certified and green and all this kind of wonderful stuff that they're implementing. So every year that we see them, they're just getting better and better and better, and as we continue the dialogue with the municipalities about tiny homes, we're seeing a lot more municipal planning departments kind of coming on board and recognizing that these are legitimate homes.
Yeah.
They're well built, they're well constructed, they serve a purpose. Again, a tiny home is not for everybody. Not everybody's going to want to live in, sub 400 square foot of living space. However, there is people out there in our community who that is perfect for them. That's all the space that they need. They don't need anything more. There just might be a single person or a couple. They don't need a lot of space, right? Who are we to judge how much space somebody needs to live, right? I had these conversations before with Committee of Adjustment, sometimes doing applications a number of years ago where we had required a minimum unit size here in Hamilton to have a dwelling unit. 55 square meter was a minimum. It was 65 square meters was the minimum unit size. And the Committee of Adjustment would push back on our application saying, that's way too small. Who don't want to live in a space that small.
Right.
My comment to them was,
a lot of people.
Who are you to judge,
Yeah.
How small somebody's living space should be, right? And at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with a nice, well-built, small, compact unit, very energy efficient. It's great for our environment, and it's another housing option. And what we need right now, more than anything else, are options for people. People don't have a lot of options right now, right? We have very limited supply. So tiny homes is a great option for people to consider.
Can you see, because we have so many different types of neighborhoods in Hamilton, the single family dwellings, the townhome areas, we're getting a lot of condos here. Can you see one day a developer saying, you know what, maybe a tiny home suburb community, whatever the case is, might make sense, which will help alleviate some of our, housing woes?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess we should maybe clarify, what is a tiny home, let's say, versus a secondary dwelling unit or an additional dwelling unit, okay? Because there are some key differences, right? And we really need to make sure we're getting the terminology right here. So a tiny home is a bit of a broad description. It's really, minimum 188 square feet to maybe upwards of 450 square feet, okay? That's a widely acceptable kind of size for what we're calling a tiny home. Now, when people think of tiny home, and what we saw a lot at the tiny home show was tiny homes on wheels. Okay. So, a tiny home that's been built in a traditional sense as far as traditional materials, just like a regular home, but it's been framed onto a trailer with wheels, right? And it's designed to be like mobile and moved around and stuff like that. Whereas like a secondary dwelling unit detached, which is what they're calling them here in Hamilton, or additional dwelling unit detached, is same thing. It's a smaller, size of unit, but it's built on a permanent foundation.
Right.
So a concrete foundation or helical piers or concrete sonotubes or something that's a permanent fixed foundation, right? And so, some people, we get leads that come in and they say, I want a tiny home in my backyard. But then I have to clarify for them, are you wanting a tiny home on wheels? Like that you,
right.
That you
what kind of tiny home do you want?
Right? Yeah. Or are you wanting what we're calling a secondary dwelling unit detached, like just like a new small home on a foundation?
Right.
And so it's really a zoning discussion because, like here in Hamilton, for instance, like you couldn't have a tiny home on wheels in your backyard because that would be considered more like a mobile home. And that is a different type of housing form that has specific zoning bylaw requirements. Here in Hamilton, it's really our rural zones, so like our A1s, our A2, there are rural kind of farm properties that allow like what they call a farm labor residence, which is like a mobile home on wheels of a temporary nature, right? It's designed to not be a permanent kind of fixture. And so, when it comes to, our municipalities and when it comes to the planning of our communities, right now, we don't really have tiny home communities. There's still more like mobile home parks or RV parks, right? And, so it's an evolving conversation we're having with our municipalities. There's a lot of action groups. The Tiny Home Show was a great time for municipal leaders who did come out and learn about how they can implement an actual tiny home community in their jurisdiction. But, right now in Hamilton, we're not permitted tiny homes on wheels unless you're in like a rural agricultural zone.
I would suspect that is for property tax purposes, right? If you have a tiny home that is situated on the ground, it's serviced in the whole bit in, say, your backyard, that would be taxed from a property tax perspective?
Well, from a property tax perspective, like it's all about the assessment value of the property. That's an MPAC. MPAC would, if you have, a single family home that has a secondary dwelling unit and maybe you have a secondary dwelling unit detached in the backyard, and if you submitted for building permits for that construction, the builder would have put on the building permit application form the value of that work. So it's $100, $200, $300, whatever $1,000 it was, right? MPAC would come along and reassess the property, increase the assessment value, therefore your property taxes go up, right?
Right.
It's not really the the city building division or planning department that would determine that.
Okay.
But it's more just from a land use planning perspective, right? Like, same conversations that they have about density, single family neighborhood with townhouses or duplexes or triplexes or fourplexes. Like, we like this getting into a bit of a different topic about exclusionary zoning policies that we have in all of our cities have exclusionary zoning policies that limit, what types of housing types you can build in certain areas. And that's caused, like basically in Toronto, you see the yellow belt, right?
Yeah,
These wide swaths of area of just low single family housing density, right? And so we're trying to encourage and get rid of exclusionary zoning, more like open zoning, I guess I'd call it. I'm not a planner, but where we can have like fourplexes and single families and triplexes all within the same neighborhood.
Yeah. That would be interesting to see. The diversification would, as you mentioned earlier, just present so many more options to home buyers or people who, need a place to live.
Well, if you actually look on an aerial map of a typical neighborhood, you'll see that there is lots of space. There's ample space within our existing urban boundary. There's lots of green open spaces. We have a lot of, low density areas that really could be grouped together. Maybe some of these smaller, older single family homes kind of torn down in like a medium size development built, increasing the density, all within our urban boundaries, all using existing infrastructure, existing roads, sewers, sidewalks, etc., right? Bringing population to our existing schools and libraries and stores, right? But that's a whole other, topic we can get into about, why increasing density within our existing urban boundary is so important and why we do have ample space within our urban boundary. The whole expansion into the green belt, it's a very divisive topic. Yes, we do need to grow out, but more importantly, we need to be growing up and increasing the density of what we do have. Yeah,
I've been a proponent of that as well, because as you mentioned, there is a lot of space in town and the services are already there. So from a developer's perspective, that would be much more cost efficient, would it not?
It is, right? Like, site servicing is very expensive.
Yeah.
If anybody has ever done any form of development work, whether it's even, creating a lot severance and building just a new single family home on a lot, the servicing work required for that is very expensive, right? Adding sanitary laterals and storm laterals and water service lines. You take that one step bigger and now you have to create the roads, create the sidewalks, create pumping stations and et cetera. It's very, very expensive, right? And this is why we're a big proponent of using existing housing stock that we have, existing buildings, and just better utilizing them, right? A lot of our houses and buildings have so much space in them. Like people don't even use all the space, right? I see opportunity everywhere. Every house I see and building I see, I'm like, we can add a unit here, we can add a unit there, and we put a unit back there and up here. And there's ample opportunity, ample space out there. The problem right now is that it's getting so costly to do it, right? And this is where we need more government incentives and grants, especially for homeowners, especially for small mom and pop landlords, to help encourage these folks to go out and build these units within their homes, within their existing buildings, right? We don't need to be giving huge government subsidies to these big national, multinational companies. We need to be giving them to the everyday folks who can create units within their existing homes, make their lives more financially stable, bring financial power back to the people, let them be more self-sufficient, let them get off of the government, get them more self-sufficient, creating income for themselves. It's a catalyst for so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump into the crisis in our building departments. We're seeing it here and practically everywhere.
Yeah, so actually this is, we don't hear about this at all whatsoever in the media because a lot of this happens behind closed doors, right? We have individual plan examiners they could be working from home. They could be working in the actual department at the city. And we have, applicants, property owners, developers who are sitting on the other side of the desk, in their offices, their homes, working on submissions, building permit submissions, reviewing applications. And right now, we have a lack of plan examiners in our building divisions. Every building division I know that I've worked in, which is, well in excess of 50 at least here in Ontario, they all struggle with not enough plan examiners to review the applications that are coming in, right? There's this big push to build a lot more housing, right? They all need building permits, right? the government wants to build 1.5 million houses, right? They all require a building permit. We don't have enough staff at our cities to review these applications coming in. So what happens is that they're under a lot of stress and pressure to get permits out the door. Because during COVID, a lot of the more senior staff ended up retiring, and we have a lot of newer recruits coming in. Well, these newer recruits, they're not as well trained as the old guys, right? And so they're still learning while they're working from home. A lot of them are working from home or this hybrid work model. They're not getting the actual on-site training by a senior staff member to really help them with their learning of the building code and zoning bylaws and stuff. And so we see a lot of, delays on issuing permits because, sometimes the comments that we get back aren't correct, right? Like the city plan examiner made a mistake on their interpretation of the code or the zoning policy. Sometimes we make mistakes, right, on our end as the designers. A lot of design firms, architecture firms are struggling with, staff as well. On our ends, trying to find enough qualified BCIN designers to work at our firms, right, to help with the increasing demand. So this causes a very stressful, tense environment. And so actually, so this past week, we have applications going on in the City of London. Right, there's an actual crisis in the London building department right now. I was on the phone with the manager of plan examination, and he says they're having emergency meetings with their city council about their staff at the building department. 3 of them just went off on medical leave because of stress. Right, because they're so understaffed over there. Right now, I think they have 14 open positions for plan examiners at their building department, right? And so there's so much workload that's being put on very few staff. They're getting burned out. They're getting stressed. Causes a lot of delays. The applicants are getting frustrated. They're getting angry. They're sending in angry emails, angry phone calls. More of staff's time is being spent on dealing with angry emails and phone calls than actual plan examination and permit issuance, right? So, and this is this is not just a City of London thing. This is a City of Hamilton thing. I've had conversations with the chief building official here, Alan, about similar problems here. Not having enough. I think they had 12 open positions here last time I heard in our building division here in the city, right? So this is a major, major problem. It's a crisis in our building departments, right? It's a crisis in the architectural design industry that we don't have enough designers and plan examiners who know the building code, who can review these applications, So I think that we need to be looking at possibly some privatization of plan examination, third-party qualified building code reviewers, right? And there's provisions in the Building Code Act for a third party, people that are qualified in the building code to review applications as well and help the city out and review applications, help get permits issued, right? We don't have enough city staff. We do not have enough city staff to do it. This is another way for the private sector, I think, to help out in the housing situation by helping our plan examiners get permits issued. It's
very interesting. It's one of the hidden issues that, we don't hear much about, but it sounds like this is a serious issue. Is there an answer at the end of the tunnel here, though?
They're casting their net wide. They're, our cities they're advertising and putting job postings like all across the country, and the thing is right now, we see it too in our office for our job postings that a lot of the applicants that are applying are coming from overseas, right? And they're coming in from overseas. But the problem is, which is great, we need immigration. We need foreign workers to help our labor shortage. But especially when it comes to building code and zoning policy, it's a very technical work, right? And a lot of stuff you need like real world life experience in building and construction to truly be a good plan examiner, right? And so they're struggling with basically foreigners who are applying who don't really have the qualifications or the skill set to be a good plan examiner. And so frankly, I don't think we have enough people here to do it. So, I don't know the solution. This is a labor issue. Many industries are struggling with labor. It's not just the design and building plan examination industry. It's home builders are struggling with guys to work on the construction sites. Like as our older construction guys retire, like a lot of these big builders, Portuguese, the Greeks, the Italians, the Dutch, right? Those guys are getting older. The average age of these workers is now like 52, right? For every 14 that retire, there's one coming in, right? So over the next decade here, we're losing a lot of our skilled guys. They're retiring, right? And we don't have the young guys coming up who actually want to work hard, pick up a shovel, and build.
It's a big issue.
It's a big issue. We're there to help people create these units, right? To uncover the opportunity that is right in front of them, right? So many people they don't know what they have, right? And like I was mentioning earlier, I see opportunity everywhere. So that's where we come in. We really help, assess the property, assess the building, from a zoning perspective, from a building code perspective, and try and help people bring their properties and buildings up to the highest and best use, right? So like the highest and best use for, a single family home might be a triplex, might be a fourplex, right? And, sometimes it's easier said than done, just because a zoning may permit a fourplex. Like here in Hamilton, they've updated their bylaws and they're allowing converted dwellings, which is up to 4 units.
Okay.
And so just because a zoning permits 4 units doesn't mean that actual building or house can accommodate 4 units and still meet the building code, right? So this is where it's important to do walkthroughs, on-site inspections, consulting with the homeowner about the feasibility of these projects, right? And cost of construction perspective as well. So like my experience, has been in the design industry, in the construction industry. We're actively designing and building these units. So we're up to date. We're current on current zoning, current building code, current cost of construction. So we have really frank conversations with people about their projects, right? I'm here to help people, not only helping them implement units, but helping them financially make good decisions about investing in these units and into these spaces. A big problem we have right now when it comes to the garden suites, the coach houses, the laneway houses, even tiny homes, is that on the financing side of these projects, is that lenders and appraisers aren't putting the true value of those units when it comes to appraising the property. So we know that when we build a laneway house or a coach house, garden suite, secondary dwelling, whatever you want to call it, we know that it's basically another single family home on the property, right? That can generate $2,000 plus per month in rental income. We know that as investors, that's valuable. Problem is the appraisers don't put the same value on those units. Why? Because it's such a new industry. We don't have a lot of comps, so a lot of properties that have been sold that have these units implemented on them. So they can't put a true value on what's been sold. Lenders work off of the appraised value for a property when they're considering lending money to it. And so that's a problem right now. So that people can't, like we talked about earlier, 98% of these projects are financed, right? If you can't get the construction financing to build the unit, you can't, right? And so I have these frank conversations with people that look, as much as we would love to build a garden suite, until we see a lot more of these units and a lot more appraisals and lenders coming on board, right now may not be the best time to do it. Maybe we wait 2 years and do it. Maybe we focus first on the basement apartment. Maybe we focus first on the existing dwelling, adding units in that, get that done, refinance the property, then take the proceeds, and then go and build that garden suite maybe a couple years later.
Right.
Allow the industry to mature, so that when you go and do that project, you'll have an easier time refinancing. So it's not, like I said, it's also kind of financial advice. right? About I'm also a landlord. I have a lot of rental properties myself. I understand the landlord-tenant relationship and the delicate balance that is, right? And the respect that has to happen on both sides. And so I'm also advising first-time landlords and first-time property investors about how to go about things the right way, how to properly renovate your home, make it legal, make sure you're compliant, make sure you're doing proper soundproofing, maybe separating the heating and cooling systems to make these nice, livable spaces, which will ultimately help your landlord-tenant relationship down the road. So, just sharing a lot of real-world life experience with people so that people don't make mistakes, right? We need a lot of housing built fast. We don't want people out there making mistakes and going about it haphazardly. Like, we're talking about large sums of money, when it comes to purchasing houses and adding and creating units. It does cost money, right? For some people, this is their whole nest egg, right, that we're talking about. So it's a very important work.
Absolutely. Great tips and advice from Ken Bekendam. And you can get a hold of him and his team online by booking a free consultation today. Get more out of your home online at LegalSecondSuites.com. Thank you for listening to the Building Hamilton Show with Ken Bekendam, brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com on 900 CHML.